Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, I'm very fortunate to have a very interesting guy on my show by the name of Devon White. He's an expert in behavioral design. And, I just want to tell you, Devon, we need to talk a little bit about what that means, behavioral design. Now, let me give a little more information. He has spent the past decades working with high-impact top performers, from C-suite executives to Cannes Award-winning directors to elite military operators, helping them function in balance and at a peak across every domain of their lives. So we have this guest called Devon White, and boy, does he have a lot to talk about. Welcome, Devon, to the Susan Brender Show.
Well, Susan, thank you very much for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be on the call with you today.
Thank you. Now, let's talk a little bit about your life's work. What have you been actually doing that people can understand? And if it's things that they don't, I want you to explain it a little bit more.
All right, excellent. Well, the easiest things to understand are that I help people, we could say, be at their best. That's gained more cultural purchase, that term, in the last 5 to 10 years, I'd say. And I do it in a way which is, I'm kind of like a biofeedback machine, where when I sit down with someone, people come with problems. This is what's wrong in my life. Can you help me fix it? And the model that I operate from flips that on its head and instead starts them with, tell me about a time where you were at your best, absolutely, and what that was like for you. And as soon as I ask that question, you can see the wheels, so to speak, turning in their head. You can see everything in their body shift as their gaze lifts up and 30 degrees off the horizon and 5 feet out, and they take a breath and their hips shift. And what they're doing is, in order to make sense of that question, tell me about a time when you were at your best, they have to process it in a way where they actually access that experience.
Right.
And then what I'm doing is I'm simply amplifying it so that they can begin to have it in the moment.
Okay, now, the people that come to you, these people have problems, psychological problems or physical problems. Why do they come to you, and why do they ask you to help them?
So I used to be, if you'd been to everyone under the sun and nothing was working for you, electric shock therapy and Prozac and psychology and medical doctors, none of it worked. I was kind of the last resort, and people would come to me because what I did was effective. These days, I work less with people who are having a lot of issues in that form, because about 10 or 15 years ago, I realized that what I wanted to do was make a bigger impact in the world, and that meant helping people who were already performing near or at peak and pushing them just a little bit further, because these were the kinds of people who were going to make an impact at a very high level, where a little change with them could ripple out to tens, if not hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, because that's how they were connected in the world.
Interesting. Now, these people that you work with who come to you and say, I've tried everything, and it's very depressing and it's very anxiety-provoking, because no matter what I do, I can't get through it. I'm in a black hole. So, okay, set the stage for me now. Let me kind of get a sense. They walk into your office, Devon. What happens?
Well, these days I usually walk into their office. They'll fly me out to California, or I'll head into Manhattan or wherever they are, and I'll walk in, and usually what happens is we just start talking, because everybody thinks that there has to be all of this stuff that goes into it. I want to see people in their natural habitat. I want to see how they function in the moment, because in the moment is where all of the best change happens. So I just start talking with them and finding out what's going on in their life, what are their issues, what are the things that they could enhance or optimize, and why do they want to do it? Because what really matters for each and every person is the deepest values, the deepest motivating factors in their lives, or you could say the myth or the story that they're inside of that is both empowering them but also limiting them. And I want to suss all of that out so that I can begin to help them really discover for themselves why they've been doing it this other way that isn't working and stop doing it that way so that they don't have to think about it. Because what I want at the end of any session with them is for them to walk out and the change has already happened. So there's nothing left for them to do. Maybe there's still things that they're going to work on. They have new habits to build and such, but I want it so that the deepest issue is already, in a sense, forgotten.
Now, what about the brain? The brain is very, very complicated. Can you explain to our audience the parts of the brain that work on making things better for these people and giving them an opportunity to kind of like just chill out?
Well, the entire brain is designed for homeostasis. So we don't even need to break it into parts to say every aspect of your brain, your entire being is designed for health and wellness and well-formedness and a kind of balance and homeostasis. And what happens is our whole cultural model of health and wellness is really, there's somewhat of a revolution. There's a lot of alternative medicine and there's, changes in psychology. But since Newton and Descartes broke it out into these ideas that everyone is separate, it's totally screwed it up in terms of how people think about everything being broken into parts rather than in terms of what are they like when they're healthy and how do you support them in achieving those states of health so that they can move out into the world and constantly be pinging that, like, here's how I am at my best. And if something comes up that knocks them off, they ping that again. They reset, they recenter, and they begin again. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the brain, it's all designed to do that, and it's only when a piece of it gets out of whack and then starts cycling on itself, and everyone's had that experience. You have a moment where, someone breaks your heart, and boom, this incredibly powerful emotion overtakes you, and it can be crippling, and that's fine. That's a beautiful, if agonizing part of life from time to time that we're supposed to have. We go through those, are life experiences. But if what happens is then on top of that, you start ruminating and thinking about it and telling yourself a story, and you use those words to reinforce the emotion, to reinforce the words, to reinforce the emotion, and then you start to get lethargic, and then your body starts to, your shoulders roll forward, and your stomach sucks in, and you become more and more depressed. Now it gets into a terrible cycle that can lead into depression.
Yes.
So that's what we want to avoid. We want to take the system's ability to reset and bring it back online, allowing you to have the fullness of all of your emotions, all of the experiences of life without getting lost inside of these, kind of dead-end cul-de-sacs.
Yeah. Now, Devon, here's something else that I'm interested in knowing about, and that is, do your families play a role? Is there a genetic genetic predisposition for this to happen? I'm talking about depression. I'm talking about anxiety. Is it something to do with your family?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a huge. My first line of defense is always take responsibility. You always want to have as much responsibility for your own behavior, for your own feelings and emotions as possible, because that's the most empowering position to move from. That being said, absolutely, there are studies at this point. There was the Dutch famine, or the Dutch hunger, it was called, and it was kind of an unintentional experiment done by the Nazis on the Dutch people, when the Dutch said, "Hey, we're not going to participate in this war, and they said, we're going to starve you." we're not sending any food to you. And so what happened is all of the children who were in utero during that time when these mothers were without enough food changed. They were taking, as we grow up, that we have stages of development, and that the first stage of development is in utero. And so when you're in utero, if the signals from the system, in this case the system being your mother and the blood chemistry that's being fed into your body, and if it's saying there's not enough food out here, then it changes you at the genetic level to process food differently. So these children became very, we'll say, I think they call it thrifty.
Yeah.
So they became food thrifty. And what happened was then they came out and the famine ended, but their genes had been designed in a way that had been imprinted in a way that was different than normal. And so for the rest of their life, they had these thriftier genes that used food in a different way and led to overweightness and diabetes because they were processing it differently. That happens all over the place. There's absolutely a ton. I mean, that's one of the pieces of evidence that we know, and there's been a lot of research that goes into it. Children of Holocaust survivors also see some of the effects of it. And over and over, there are ties, there are genetic ties to depression, to any number of illnesses and disorders, and penchants for, happiness and well-being as well.
Sure.
So just as much as looks, personality, emotional tendencies towards alcoholism, and they're all passed down to some degree or another. And so it's useful to know.
Yeah, it is very useful to know. Now, here's another interesting little tidbit that I can tell you. I remember of this guy who became very depressed, and his attitude was, I'm going to take a happy pill. This happy pill is going to help me. Now, you talked about alternative medicine. Let's compare alternative medicine to just medicine in general that psychologists, psychiatrists give you. Do you believe in medication being one of the parts of your treatment, or do you think that there's another way to get out of it?
I believe do what works. And what that means to me is don't become dependent on anything. Like, if you have to, do it. But as much as possible, rely on short-term interventions that help you reset and achieve homeostasis without becoming dependent on anything as a constant crutch.
Yeah.
So that's, there are some values, and especially these days, as I spend the bulk of my time with one of my partners who's a neuropsychiatrist, and another of my partners, she's also a doctor, using much less, I'm going to say invasive, but also systemically disruptive technologies, which work in a way that is considerably different than drugs. Because what drugs do is they run through the system and they give kind of they pump the chemicals in, so they change your neurochemistry and you have a new kind of experience of the world. Now I'm happy. I have my happy pill, now I'm happy.
Yeah.
But you take that away and the system is still designed exactly the same, and it doesn't have that neurochemistry anymore, so it might not be as happy anymore unless while you were up, you learned the habits and the routines and the behaviors that were going to help to stabilize that.
Right.
So really what you want to do, though, is you want to retrain the neurology inside of the brain. So you change the wetware itself so that even at the neural level, the habits and the wiring and the firing becomes that of a person who's happy rather than that of a person who's dependent on a happy pill.
I hear you. Now, where does technology come into all of this? Because technology is like literally ruling the world. It's doing everything. So how do you use technology?
So the most profound technology for me right now, other than the technology that's all around us, that's constantly engaging and changing the attention spans of our children, but right now where all of my time and attention is using cutting-edge neuromodulation technology. So
You better explain that to our audience. What is that?
I will explain. It is the future of wellness. And what I mean by that is the same thing I was just describing, where it's significantly less disruptive to the system. Mm-hmm. Someone will come in and they sit now in a spa-like environment. And the first thing that we do is we put a kind of helmet on that suddenly, Susan, you're looking at your brain on a big screen. And and we can move it around. We can look at it from top to bottom, left to right. We can see your parietal lobes and your frontal lobes, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see your brain. And instantly, especially Dr. Asif, Hasan, right? So my partner Hasan looks at it and he goes, oh. He looked at my brain and he said, "This brain doesn't have enough alpha." I said, What do you mean it doesn't have enough alpha? He says, "Not relaxed enough." I said, "I'm a very relaxed person, Hasan." He said, "Well, right here, you need a little more alpha." I said, "Okay." And he knew it just because he put the helmet on and he saw what's happening is the colors of your brain are showing up compared against a normative database of thousands of other brains that have been scanned. And so they know what the average is, and they're showing the places that your brain deviates from the norm. Sometimes those deviations are great.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not.
Can they tell whether you're going to have Alzheimer's or dementia?
Absolutely. They can tell. They can see the symptoms of it. In fact, he has halted the progress of Alzheimer's in one, and I think maybe now he's on to a second person, but one of them is almost 10 months running. He's halted the progression of their symptoms and the disease.
Amazing.
And you can see it every time they put the helmet on. Yeah, totally blows me away.
Yeah. Now, what's wrong as far as you're concerned with the current model of psychology and healthcare?
It's very problem focused. And it's changing. There's been a number of waves of psychology. The originals were, Freud and Jung and Adler. They were doing wonderful work, and it made sense that they were trying to fix problems. But the whole industry got caught up on, finding out what happened to you in your childhood, and it's just not enough. Then it moves through behaviorism. You've got like Skinner and operant conditioning, and also very useful stuff. Although it's not like people are robots and you can just tell them what to do or condition them. But there's some useful pieces in that as well. And in the 70s, there were a number of new psychologists that emerged that pointed to what is now positive psychology. And they're catching up. So the problems in psychology and the problems in allopathic Western healthcare is that it is very disease-oriented still. It's still trying to fix all the problems. So it's looking for the weakest link rather than finding the strongest link and building around that, which if you see great teamwork, the Bulls were built around Michael Jordan.
Right. Because
he was the best player. They didn't find their worst player and try to make him better. They found the best, and they built their strategies around that. And in a similar way, if you find each individual and you go, who are you? Mm-hmm. What are the things that are best about you, that you enjoy most, that you perform well at, that you excel in, and let us build around that, because obviously that's what you're here for.
That's right.
And of course there's going to be some weaknesses, but let's just shore those up.
Sure. Now, what about prevention? You just said that most of the people here in our world care about taking care of a disease, doctors, researchers. But what about prevention? Is there a way to do something before it actually erupts into a really difficult thing?
This is a big answer. The short answer is yes, absolutely. Healthcare, health insurance really needs to begin to look towards the wellness industry and towards predictive behavior. How do we predict what's going to happen and change some of that early on? And the biggest version of that is an understanding of how people work. If we know that starving a mom while she's pregnant is going to change the genetic imprinting of a child so that they become more thrifty with their genes in terms of how they consume and utilize food, well, now we know how to do that. And if we also know that, we can say, hey, how do we optimize them? How do we make it so that when they arrive, they have the best physical fitness that they could? They had the best prenatal nutrition, and they had the emotional tenor from their mother that was going to support them in being at their best. And we begin to teach people stage by stage, because everyone develops in stages, and to know, A, where they're getting their input from. Because where you're getting your input from when you're in utero is different than where you're getting it from once you're born, which is different than where you're getting it from when you're 5 and when you're 15, right? So I have 2 teenagers right now. They're not getting their information from me primarily.
Right.
Not anymore. They do because they live in the house and they're around the way that we go and the feeling of my wife and I. But a lot of their attention is now on their peers, for example. So a lot of prevention is knowing the best possible information that we can give them, what's relevant to giving them the best input at each age and stage of development so that they're the best that they can be. And then second, starting to have some, you go to the doctor for a checkup, similar, I was just telling you, we put a helmet on people and we can see what their brain is doing. We can see that way, way early. We can see the onset of Alzheimer's and treat it immediately. That becomes preventative.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Treatment like that. Just one last piece. I was talking with our children's doctor, and she is absolutely wonderful. She's a wonderful pediatrician, and works a lot with teenagers, and specifically teenage girls who have eating disorders. And she said that's like 50% of my business. And she wanted to know if I would help on it. I said, I can, but I have very little time, and it's a lot of work, especially eating disorders. But now what we're finding is we can put on, after we see what your brain is doing, then we can put little magnetic bursts into the brain that excite or inhibit the field that the brain is generating, and it totally changes the neural firing patterns in a way that can cut off addiction, it can change self-image, and then we add to that neurofeedback that goes, oh, we want a little bit more relaxation here, we want a little bit more focus. Kids who have ADD or ADHD, oftentimes what's happening is they have, the brain is firing, but there's all these volleys from the back of the brain. So like visual information is coming in and the motor cortex is going fire, fire, fire. But the frontal resources, the front part of the brain, haven't developed enough yet to process it and know what to do with it. So the volleys are coming forward, but the front of the brain isn't on yet. And so what happens is they just start fidgeting in class because it's just firing off their limbs to move around.
Yeah.
Now what happens instead is, so when they take drugs, what happens is it adds something that speeds up that part of the brain so it can process faster. Now, instead, we just put this other kind of helmet on, give them a little neurofeedback, and it dials up that part of the brain more naturally and makes it so that they become trained to, their brain has more, we'll say beta, it's a type of wavelength. That means it's more actively processing the information that's coming forward. And almost instantly, you do this for a few weeks, and it totally changes the way that they're functioning. And they don't have the sporadic motor movements anymore because they're able to focus. The brain is now able to focus because it has the ability to do that because it was trained to do that.
That's fantastic. Now, I want to know, and I'm very curious, is the NIH dealing with this issue? What about our government in general? Do they know about what you're doing, and do they support it? Because I'm sure it costs a lot to do all this research and to understand all of the things that you're talking about. So what about the Trump administration? Are they knowing? Are they doing? Are they interested in helping out with this kind of project?
Honestly, I have no idea. I haven't tried to have any interaction with the government. Two of my partners are doctors, so they are, they stay on the right side of the law, so they're active members of the communities of QEEG and transcranial magnetic stimulation and neuromodulation, and they're part of the professional societies that monitor and make the rules of these, that govern these various technologies. But in terms of how the NIH is running their rulings, we're not big enough that they would care.
Really?
And we're not out. I'm not out making any medical claims. I can relay some anecdotal evidence of things that I've seen in the clinic, and that's where I leave it.
Yeah.
I believe that they will. I mean, some of this information, some of the stuff, we're working. One of our board of advisors designed the Mind Gym, the original version of the Mind Gym for the Navy SEALs, for SEAL Team 6 and DevGru. And so, there's some crossover there, but him advising for us is because he's a wonderful guy who's interested in performance and interested in the evolution of humanity, not because he was part of, a governmental organization, and that's where the crossover is.
I see. Well, now in several places I've read you're talking about a successful future for us all. What does that mean, and what does that look like? Because doesn't everybody want to see a successful world, even though we're living during a time that is so difficult? What do you think?
I would think that everyone would want that, but based on the behaviors that we see everywhere, it seems obvious to me that even though I think that that's logical, they don't. And the truth is, we live in a somewhat cutthroat world, and to be Donald Trump, you have to be Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who I look at and I don't go, this guy definitely wants a successful future for us all. And that's one of the big models now that people are looking up to. So in terms of, when I'm talking about a successful future for us all, I don't have the market cornered on what that best future looks like. But for sure, there's greater connectivity between us all. The ability to coordinate our actions on behalf of the most successful future for us all seems like it has to play a major part if we're going to get there. So for me, I look and I go, all right, well, we need to have some kind of roadmap. And I see the UN. I think they've made some wonderful attempts at this, and I think that they are doing their best to steward us in that direction. And I think a major part of it has to be some kind of global interface that is personalized. It connects each of us with our own best versions, but also with a meaningful place in the larger system and the ability to effectively take actions that are coordinated with other people to achieve the ends that make sense for everyone.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, something that we've been talking about is all about all this work that you're doing in behavioral modulation and various other things to look in people's brains to figure out how you can change them so that they feel good, okay? But what about Devon? I mean, you must have some fun doing other things, Devon. Let's learn a little bit about you so that when we end the show, not only did we hear such interesting stuff that can benefit so many people, but I want to know a little bit about Devon. So where did you get all this knowledge? Where did you get all this information, and why this particular field?
Oh, you know what? I was just a weird kid who this was what I wanted to do for as long as I can remember. I have a mom who's a psychologist. I had a stepfather who was a psychologist, and like every kid who's in high school that doesn't feel great, I just wanted to get to the bottom of it, and that led me down a path of meditating and yoga and altering my consciousness in any way that I could. And I just, once I pulled that thread, I couldn't stop. I had to keep following it and following it and following it, and making my life about it. I just, I ended up from there going to a school that allowed me to study consciousness and quantum mechanics and neuropsychology, and I studied with some of the most remarkable hypnotists in the world, probably for about close to 15 years. And, just started applying it and folding it over on itself again and again, largely because I guess that's just how I came. It was really, it was what always interested me. And so it was easy to put 80 hours a week into just delving into it and reading voluminously on any topic that seemed to intersect with how can we make it so that people are happier, healthier, more satisfied, and more fulfilled as they live lives where they perform at peak and enjoy themselves.
Well, that's a whole mouthful, I'll tell you. Now, if you wanted to give somebody advice, okay, about the field that you're in, what would you say to them? And would you tell them how difficult it is or how hard it is to really achieve what you're achieving? Or would you say, go for it? What would you do?
It depends on who they are and where. It's all specific to the situation and the person. But, I'm a live for your dreams kind of guy. So I'm everything. Everything takes work. If you want to be really a thought leader or a change maker in any field, there's going to be hard days, there's going to be downs, and there's going to be ups. Yes. And in the field of consciousness right now, everything is changing. Consciousness hacking has a foothold in our culture. The world is getting smaller in many ways, and you can collaborate with people all over the world. And the technology is really about to change the entire game. Yeah. So, that's where I am.
That I hear you. So, if our audience or somebody in our audience wants to get in touch with you and ask you some more questions, is there any way that they can do that?
Absolutely. The best place to get in touch with me right now is through my website, experiencethefield.com. And my email for that is Devon, DEVON, at experiencethefield.com. Because that's where I'm putting all of my attention is if we want to change the world, if we want to really create a future that supports us all, I want to help optimize people who have a passion for making that happen. And if you live in Manhattan in particular, reach out. Otherwise, you can reach out to me there either way, and I'm happy to chat.
Well, my guest today has been Devon White, and Devon is, as you heard, amazing. He's doing work that is just blows me away. So I want to thank Devon White for being on the Susan Brender Show. It was a true pleasure.
Susan, thank you so much for having me. I deeply appreciate it, and you're such a delight to talk with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.